welcome to The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Friday, August the 28th, 2020.
Fidel Castro, Julius Caesar, Mobutu Sese Seko. That was not an American president giving an acceptance speech. That was a monarch. It was very much like what Castro used to do, an hour and 10 minutes that clocked in of just, it wasn't a usual Trump speech with his ad libs and he did the sort of humor kind of thrown into it. He said, the fact is I'm here and they're not. He made the White House into the Trump palace. If democracy in America ever falls and we become a complete autocracy with a decrepit leader and his corrupt family moving their trunks into the White House and never leaving, if we become the old DRC, or we become what Brazil is now, if we just fall as a democracy, tonight is what it will look like.
That was Joy Reid last night talking about night 4 of the Republican National Convention, which came to an end with Donald Trump's long-winded 70-minute speech. And it was a speech that was devoid of much of anything. On this episode of The Politicrat, a look back at last night's closing night of the Republican National Convention. The focus, of course, will be Donald Trump. But there'll also be another topic on the agenda, the March on Washington. And it includes the full speech from Martin Luther King Jr. on this, the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, and the full airing of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, plus remembering Emmett Till on this, the 65th year that he was killed 65 years ago today. All of that coming up next. Well, mercifully, the Republican National Convention has come to an end, and I must say that this was a long 4 days or 4 nights. It's been a long year. It's been a long 3.5 years. If you are a Republican who is also a Trump supporter, then you may think that these are the best 3.5 years of your life. Or maybe someone feels that way. But it feels like 10 years have gone by in the last 3.5 years, not 3.5 years. And this convention this week was an onslaught of hastily cut together speeches, one after the next, like a procession. And we finally got to night number 4. And there was little doubt that from the moment you started to see thousands of people, around 1,500 or so, assemble on the South Lawn for what was always going to be a carefully produced outdoor spectacle. You knew that there was going to be a lot of spectacle but no substance, and that's exactly what Donald Trump's speech was. It was one of the worst speeches ever given by any sitting commander-in-chief. At 70 minutes, it was long, it was dry, it was boring, and of course, it was full of lies. Donald Trump, by my count, lied almost 200 times. And that is equivalent to 3 lies a minute if you average it out. Almost 3 lies per minute. From what I saw last night, Donald Trump was not interested in winning an election at all. He was a man interested in holding on to power by any means necessary. In fact, he even invoked that phrase during his speech. This was one of the most shameful displays, or in his case, shameless displays of egotism and self-aggrandizement I can ever remember. For one, the fact that the South Lawn was used for a political campaign was absolutely abhorrent and offensive. Never before had a sitting commander-in-chief used the White House as a political prop, and never before had any sitting commander-in-chief given a speech for a political campaign on the grounds of the White House, let alone the South Lawn, which grotesquely had these grotesquely large signs that said Trump Pence on either side of the speaking dais. It was one of the most repugnant things that I have seen in terms of political campaigning. It is the most repugnant thing I've seen in terms of someone delivering an acceptance speech for a convention that had really ended already on Monday. And then for him to completely pimp out the White House on our tax dime is quite frankly unforgivable. There were numerous commentators on CNN and particularly on MSNBC here in the United States last night who made a point to talk about the very same thing that I'm talking about. This complete trampling of the people's house. Because that's what the White House is. The White House is not the Donald Trump house. He really made a great show to make you feel that way. He went to great lengths to make you feel that way. That this was not your house and it was his. And even if Donald Trump won the Electoral College, which he did, regardless of how he did it, we all know how he did it, but he did win it through those means. That house never ever becomes the occupant's house. No matter who is in that house belongs to the people of the country. It doesn't belong to the occupant of the house. And Donald Trump absolutely did not care about that fact last night. He leaned on the podium. He was speaking in a very robotic and monotone voice. There was no energy or conviction or effort. He was stagnant and stale and dry and incomprehensible and rambling, propagandizing, projecting, gaslighting, lying. It was all so Orwellian. And it was designed to really suck your soul dry and suck the soul out of you. It was so appalling. This speech had so many lies in it. Joe Biden was being called someone who wanted open borders. The radical Democrats, they want open borders. That was how he was speaking, except on a much, much more monotone level. Lie after lie after lie. The Democrats and Joe Biden do not want open borders. They want more sensible immigration policy, something that would be more suitable to giving people a chance, but not open borders. They've never advocated for that. These things are made up out of whole cloth by Republicans. No Democrat has ever called for open borders. So that was one of many lies that were told last night. There was lies about abortion. There were lies about the economy. Donald Trump lying and saying that the economy was the best ever, and which it wasn't. You know, so many jobs have been lost this year. 45 million jobs and counting. Donald Trump said, we've got 9 million jobs. But, you know, maybe that's true, maybe it's not. I don't think that's even true. But one thing I can tell you is true is that there was huge job losses in the preceding weeks and months before that, and Donald Trump never mentioned them. Donald Trump last night never mentioned Jacob Blake, the young African-American man who was shot 7 times in the back at close range by a police officer in Wisconsin. Donald Trump never mentioned the white racist terrorist killer, Kyle Rittenhouse, who had, by the way, been in the front row of a Trump rally earlier this year. You would think that Donald Trump would remember to point that terrorist killer out. But that's not the strategy of this campaign. In fact, as someone pointed out last night on TV, this isn't even really a campaign for Donald Trump. It really isn't. You've got one side in the Democrats running for elective office and running their campaign in the usual way. And then you've got, on the other side, a person who just really doesn't care about governing. He just wants to be there in power. As you heard Joy Reid say at the beginning, a monarch. He believes that he is King Donald. And there are so many other places in that speech where he rambled and he lied. It really was disgusting. And normally under these circumstances, I would play the speech, but the speech is so full of lies. It would take fact checkers a good while. And it took me a while to get some things assembled, and I'm not going to go through every single lie here. But there are all kinds of things going on, even beyond this speech, and I will be playing some sound throughout this episode with people who, well, literally in the next few moments, people on MSNBC who had a real go, rightfully so, at Donald Trump because of what was going on. It was just such an unseemly and unpatriotic thing to do. And so many people that you saw, if you watched this convention speech tonight, were violating all kinds of rules and regulations and laws. So, I mean, this was not a good speech last night. Donald Trump did everything he could to try to convince, I think, white suburban women to vote for him. But I don't think that this is going to be much of a comfort at all, because in trying to convince them, he has absolutely made an even bigger pig's ear of himself. And it's just a situation now where I think this campaign has got nowhere to go. I think Donald Trump already knows he's lost the election. The question is, can he keep power? And I think that is what Donald Trump is genuflecting to at the moment.
All I have to say is, as I'm watching this, I'm thinking, Fidel Castro, Julius Caesar, Mobutu Sese Seko. That was not an American president giving an acceptance speech. That was a monarch. It was very much like what Castro used to do, an hour and 10 minutes that clocked in of just, it wasn't a usual Trump speech with his ad libs and he did the sort of humor kind of thrown into it. He said, the fact is I'm here and they're not. He made the White House into the Trump palace. If democracy in America ever falls and we become a complete autocracy with a decrepit leader and his corrupt family moving their trunks into the White House and never leaving, if we become the old DRC, or we become what Brazil is now, if we just fall as a democracy, tonight is what it will look like. This is what it will look like to have a decrepit, corrupt monarch. This was a crime. Every cabinet member that was sitting there was violating the Hatch Act. Ivanka Trump was violating the Hatch Act. This was repugnant to see a campaign sign festooned on our property on the White House with a big iron gate outside so that the people can't even come in. This was repugnant. This would be the end of America. If this is what we're going to be, this won't be a democracy. That's a monarchy. It was repugnant. Sorry.
That was Joy Reid last night on MSNBC. Joy Reid responding in full to the events of last night. I mean, it was absolutely repugnant. I completely agree with her. I mean, there's no two ways about it. This speech was not really a speech at all. It was a ramble. There was no pretense of any kind of thing that would stir an audience. His base was very subdued. They chanted occasionally for 4 more years, and they repeated that chant. But it was very, very well manufactured in the sense that the South Lawn was absolutely choreographed to look as if it was a palace. And it's disgusting because, you know, the White House is not a palace. It's the people's residence. And what Donald Trump has done to that White House is really desecrated. And in doing so, he has desecrated the country. Donald Trump has desecrated the White House. Let's just put that right up front. He's desecrated the White House, and in doing so, he has desecrated America. Having these Trump-Pence signs really on the South Lawn? The White House is the people's house. It is not the campaigning house. And I think that Donald Trump needs to be taught a lesson this November. And make sure you leave no stone unturned. Register everyone you know and tell them that these elections are very important. I mean, this is what has to happen. This is what has to happen. I mean, people are going to have to work very hard to make sure that Donald Trump is booted out of the White House come January. Omar Moore here, and I want to say thank you very much for listening to the Politicrat podcast. Every day, a brand new podcast episode. Thank you for your support. Thank you very much. Please spread the word about this podcast and subscribe to it. And you can follow me on Twitter at the Popcorn REEL. On Twitter, that's the Popcorn REEL. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate you listening. Welcome back. So the speech last night, again, as I said, was an hour and 10 minutes long, and it capped off what was a very spiteful, mean-spirited Republican National Convention. The balance of this convention, all you're left with really is fear, socialism, Black Lives Matter is bad, Democrats are people that you don't want to turn the country over to, the American dream will end if the Democrats get in, Joe Biden is a socialist. I mean, those are the kinds of ridiculously false things that were being said, the complete lies, the gaslighting, the propagandizing of this whole 4-day event was despicable. There's no two ways around it. It was despicable. And yet, there were maybe almost 2,000 people, 1,500 or so people at the South Lawn, packed together, no social or physical distancing whatsoever, and no masks were given out. There were some people wearing masks, but no masks were provided to any of the nearly 2,000 people who sat there for hours. You know, this is really, they sat there for 2-3 hours. It was just really a very, very poor convention overall. There was no platform. And then sometimes you had Donald Trump talking about, well, Joe Biden hasn't got a platform. What is Donald Trump talking about? I think at this stage, he doesn't care whether or not people know he's lying or not, because that is not what he cares about. The one thing he cares about is holding on to power. And even if that means he gets the minority of the vote, the minority of the vote, even if he gets that, he still wants to be in power. I mean, this is less about winning than it is holding on to power by any illegal means. I mean, even winning is not as big a deal to Trump as keeping power is. And I get it, you've got to win some kind of event to do that. And he may, I just do not see it. I don't see Donald Trump winning this at all. Now, of course, lots can happen between now and then. We're still, 67 or so days away from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, potentially. I mean, the results are not going to be known until maybe at least probably a week later than the November 3rd date, but November 3rd is the last time you can vote, and I dare say that a lot of people will have voted before then, because I think it's important that they do. So I'm going to play you now a portion of something that, and this is really insightful, from Michael Steele. It's a really good warning for people who are voting here in the United States between, I guess, September and November.
Michael, if we can put this graphic up from an interview Peter Baker did with the president today. President was asked for his second term agenda, and this is a minefield, but I'm going to very carefully try to quote it. I think it would be very, very, I think we'd have a very, very solid, we would continue what we're doing, we'd solidify what we've done, and we have other things on our plate that we want to get done. First of all, Michael, you're going to need a bigger bumper. But secondly, is this
you do this to me, Brian. You do this to me, man, every time.
Does he need a thesis statement for such a base-centric event?
Okay, let me collect myself. If they could put that back up, I'll tell you what's the most important thing in what he said there. And it's at the end when he says, we have other things on our plate that we want to get done. People, you have been forewarned, and he has foretold what's coming. If you think what he's done right, you think tonight was a spectacle and a violation of laws and ethics, if you think what we saw this past week in terms of how he's approached the very painful realities of COVID-19 and how he's talked about 180,000 dead Americans, that sentence right there, you take that and you write it down on a piece of paper and take it with you when you vote. And just remember, this is why you need to vote him out, because it's the other things they plan to do. That's the problem. And with a feckless leadership that's not prepared or has the ability to check him, hello.
That was Michael Steele, he, the former chair of the Republican National Committee, sounding the alarm on the importance of voting and what it really means for this coming November. Early voting begins next month here in the United States. And by the time we get to the first debate, which is toward the end of next month, 29 states would have already have begun early voting. That's over half the states in the country. Which is why this election is so important. Michael Steele, they're really telling you that the fact that there is no real plan or platform that has been announced is really the even more glaring proof that something wicked this way comes for these United States of America should Donald Trump manage to manipulate another term in the White House. I mean, this would really be a grave problem. And this is not just being said out of any kind of fear. This is a fact. Donald Trump has shown you over these last 3.5 years who he is, what his designs are, and where he wants to take this country. And it's already careening off a cliff as it is. So that was a very important and starkly honest Michael Steele talking about the importance of voting and remembering that we could really have a fascist dictatorship, and I already think we have one here in the United States. People say, well, we're not here yet. Well, we are here. This guy is an authoritarian. It's very clear what he's done. He's desecrated the institutions of this country. He has absolutely blown up the administrative state in this country. He has rendered any opposition meaningless because he is signing executive orders and usurping the role of Congress, which he has no authority to do, but yet he's still signing these executive orders. And nothing is being brought to bear against him. As you heard Michael Steele mention, feckless leadership, he was referring to the House Democrats. If you don't think he was referring to the House Democrats, the opposition party, then you've got another thing coming. Which is why it's very important for Democratic politicians this election season to sharpen their knives. Kamala Harris, I think, did very well in a speech earlier in the day. Here's another warning as well, by the way, that's coming up. Jason Johnson, he being the professor from Morgan State University. Listen to what he has to say here.
The visuals from Kenosha and Portland and Minneapolis match the narrative of every speaker tonight, match the Law and Order campaign and their plea to get people from that silent majority, people who agree with them in their hearts, may not even admit it to a pollster.
So, Brian, I think that's a really, really important question to understand where our electorate is today. Mm-hmm. If you go outside and you see that kind of violence and that kind of destruction, you would be afraid. But here's the catch. We're not going outside because there's COVID, because people are trapped in their homes, because they're sheltering in place. And while Donald Trump can spend as much time, and Rudy Giuliani and Tom Cotton and Ivanka can spend all the time they want talking about danger in the streets, they ignored throughout this entire RNC and tonight what the last 6 months have been to people. We're not going outside because people don't have jobs, because they're afraid of COVID, because they've been fired from their jobs because of COVID, because they pray every single morning that if they have to send their children to school, that those children won't come back sick with COVID, either from campus or the local elementary school. So I think that while that fear-mongering of protests and violence on the one hand may scare some people, their daily reality is infinitely more dangerous, and that is the kind of thing that Donald Trump hasn't really addressed one way or another. And I have to say, this is very important to understand when we're talking about the Hatch Act and violations. I am old enough to remember I was in school when Bill Clinton got in trouble for supposedly selling nights in the Lincoln bedroom, right? That was a big, big scandal at the time. It is important for us to remember and focus on the fact that we have a president who is not actually running a re-election campaign. This is merely him advertising to the world that he will do whatever it takes to stay in power. The Democrats are running an election campaign. They want votes. Donald Trump doesn't care about votes. He just wants to stay in power. And whether that means abusing the White House in imagery or fact, or shutting down the post office, or threatening people, or blatantly lying, that is what he's going to do. So when people go to the voting booth, If you decide to leave your home because you don't trust the mail, remember, you are removing a proto-dictator from power. He told you tonight what he's going to do, and it is not going to be good for you, your family, or anyone else you know going forward.
That was Jason Johnson, the Morgan State University professor, with a really important point about some of the propagandizing that was done at this RNC, not just last night, but throughout the week. And the warning signs again for voters that this is an imperative warning that really should be heeded, that you really must get out the vote and make sure that you educate people as well. Jason Johnson sounding the alarm bells on some very serious things concerning Donald Trump and the need to make sure that he does not get a second term. So again, a very important night, and certainly a night, though, that will live in infamy as far as Donald Trump is concerned. I'm sure this was a very, very, very sickening night to watch what we were seeing in Washington on the last day of this Republican National Convention. I'll be right back. So with just 67 days or so left before November 3rd, the mantra now is to get out there and get out the vote, work hard, educate people, whatever you can do in your own small way. Make sure you do something. Make sure you educate people. Make sure you get in touch with family and friends and remind them that they've got to check their voter registration. Make sure that you tell them that they can apply for absentee ballot in most states right now inside the U.S., and also that there are deadlines and there's early voting deadlines and there's all kinds of things. Remind people, please. It's all very important indeed. Well, thank goodness that convention is over, and now it's all going to be about what we do, what you do, what I do to ensure that we bring in a new and different chapter to the next White House and desecrate or pick up the pieces of the desecration and fumigate the place as well, because it certainly needs some of that. On this date, 65 years ago, was the sad event, the horrific event, the torture and desecration and murder and lynching of Emmett Till, a 14-year-old black boy from Money, Mississippi, whom a white mob had tortured over the course of a day and night, and resulting in his death on this date 65 years ago. Emmett Till was 14, just 14 years old. Let that sink in. A white woman had said that Emmett Till had either said something to her or backtalked her or whatever, and that led to his lynching. Carolyn Donham had lied, and that lie led to the death of Emmett Till. Mamie Lee Till, Emmett's mother, had an open casket viewing of her son. His desecrated face was completely unrecognizable. She declared that she wanted the world to see what those murderers had done to her son. It was a moment that caught the imagination and attention of many people, not just in the United States, but all over the world, horrified by this grotesque and disgusting and inhumane brutality and beating of a young 14-year-old boy who had done absolutely nothing wrong. Rest in power, Emmett Till. Emmett Till has inspired a nation, and the Anti-Lynching Act was passed in the House, named after him, and passed in the House, in fact, just over 5 months ago now. In fact, just over 6 months ago now. Again, may Emmett Till rest in power. When I return, another anniversary, this one an anniversary, one to actually have some pride in, as this is the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And of course, that means Dr. Martin Luther King's speech, I Have a Dream. We'll be playing that in its full entirety next. Welcome back. 57 years ago today, the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom was the event that took place in the Washington Mall, on the Washington Mall. Over 250,000 people descended in what was a momentous day in the history of the United States of America for human rights and civil rights, as people all over the nation flocked to the Washington Mall. There were a host of speakers, including John Lewis and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and he was the person with the main spotlight on this day 57 years ago. His speech, I Have a Dream, as it was called, lasted roughly 18 minutes. The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom was exactly what it was, a march for jobs and freedom. You may look now here in this year, 2020, and ask yourself whether or not there is any freedom or any jobs, especially during this rough time with the coronavirus epidemic and an economy that has absolutely failed under Donald Trump. And while the RNC spent a lot of time this week invoking Dr. King, here is really who Dr. King was. And even in this speech, which only gets the same few lines played in the corporate news media every time, there are things that you really need to pay attention to. This is Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech in full.
I have the pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, The life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summit of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. But that is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. And they have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our body is heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only. We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina. Go back to Georgia. Go back to Louisiana. Go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities. Knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you today, my friend, so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. A dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, my country tears of thee. Sweet land of liberty of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghanies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when this happens, and when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
That was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on August the 28th, 1963. 57 years ago today. At the Washington Mall, with his speech, which is now commonly known as I Have a Dream. We have work to do in this country of ours to make it a better and safer place for everybody. And we have a long way to go to get justice and equal treatment. We are still fighting for that in this country, for black people, for brown people in particular, and also for others as well. We've been fighting for it for many years, since that speech indeed. Thank you very much for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.